March 1st, 2014, 9:15 p.m., Somerset, Kentucky. Stepfather. 1. Dear Diary, you have been created to track my bucket list adventure. I have made it my mission to kill at least 50 people in 50 states before I depart from this planet myself. But first, I should introduce myself. My name is Vance Stepp, and I live in Somerset, Kentucky, about a mile from Lake Cumberland. I'm 25 years old, about 6 foot tall, and 211 pounds. I wish I could say it was all muscle, but alas, I cannot. I also reside with my mother and 2 younger brothers. Since my early childhood, I have felt different than everyone else. I was never what one would consider an outcast, but I have always experienced difficulty relating to the emotions of others. Though I may never truly understand sadness, regret, or fear, I have educated myself on the appropriate physical responses in many emotional situations. For instance, the death of my stepfather brought great sadness to everyone involved with the funeral proceedings, but all I could think about was how crooked his tie was. I understood that I needed to blend in, so I just looked toward the ground with my forehead in my palms for about 2 minutes. Then I looked up, frowned a little, then looked back to the ground. I repeated this pattern until I was allowed to leave. Several people patted me on the back and said, "Sorry for your loss," as if they were somehow responsible. No one appeared to have an inclination that his life was ended by my hands. I have always had a constant desire for something unknown. Growing up, I could never figure out what it was. The sensation seems to originate in my stomach and spiral its way throughout the rest of my body. I assumed it had to be some kind of sexual urge that had gone unsatisfied for too long. Over time, I have tried every sexual fantasy I could imagine, while attempting to satisfy this beast that lives inside of me. Nothing has ever worked, and I contemplated suicide on more than one occasion. The feeling is unbearable, and there seemed to be no other way out. On January 4th, about 2 months ago, I had finally decided to end it all, and I was ready for it to be over. It was about midnight, and everyone in the house was in bed. I crept quietly toward the kitchen, trying to avoid the squeaky spots on the floor. I had removed a large stainless steel steak knife from the silverware drawer and sat it down at the kitchen table to cut my wrists. I had no concern with the bloody mess I would create, since I would not be around to clean it up. I knew I should have been saddened by the thought of my mom walking in and having to clean up after me, but I wasn't. As I held the blade to my wrist, I became entranced by the reflection of the moonlight on the blade. At that moment, my hairless little stepfather walked in and witnessed my actions. His endeavor to stop my plan developed into a silent struggle, which resulted in the knife being accidentally inserted into his throat. My hand was on the handle when it happened, and my face was near his. I felt the vibration as the knife disconnected his jugular. I felt the warmth of his blood running down my wrist, and I watched as the life left his eyes. I felt reborn that night. It was the first time I have experienced internal peace of that magnitude. The beast was gone, and I felt like a real person. I could even sense a form of sadness while I stared at him lying lifeless on the gray, blood-soaked tile. The sadness quickly faded, but my lifelong, unexplainable desire had finally been satisfied. Nothing in my existence had even come close to the euphoria of that moment. I wiped my prints from the knife and opened the kitchen window, hoping that his death would be treated as a robbery gone wrong. I don't know why I was even concerned about my prints because I've never had them scanned into a database before, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Before returning to bed, I stared out the window for a couple minutes while washing my hands and trying to make sense of my feelings. The moonlight glistening on the snow-covered hillside brought me even more peace. I watched my breath in the winter air and attempted to make smoke rings. I didn't want that night to end, but I couldn't be caught standing by a dead body. I awoke that morning to my mother screaming, and I was not a suspect. I struggled for 3 days as the wonderful feeling began to fade and the beast returned. As excruciatingly uncomfortable as my life was prior to his death, it had become even worse. Now that my urge was identified, I realized I had some decisions to make. It was already clear that I would rather die than to live in agony. I understood murder was wrong, and if I were captured, I would be sent to prison. After some deliberation, I determined I would submit to my cravings and live the rest of my days in peace. I decided to never see the inside of a courtroom. I will make the police kill me instead.